Hi, this is Saransh here. In the next case, I'll be interviewing a candidate for a market entry case. The candidate makes a strong start but struggles later on in an estimation involved during the case. The candidate could have been more prudent with his time by taking pauses at the right intervals so as to have thought through his approach before diving into it. I hope you'll find this case useful from a learning point of view. Thanks. Hi Avinash, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Saransh. What about you?
I'm doing great as well. Thanks for coming in. Let's get started with your case.
Sure thing.
So, our client is a German manufacturer
Sure.
and they are looking to enter the Indian market with a solar lantern, which is their main product.
Okay. So, what is their metric to enter the market? Are they looking at profits, or is there some other consideration for entering the market?
Right, so I guess we can estimate what would be the expected profits over a couple of years' time, and based on that, we can make an assessment if this is an attractive opportunity or not. Additionally, we would also like you to suggest us what should be our operating model. This was a good preliminary question that the candidate asked. Market entry questions can often be very ambiguous with their goals, especially when the interviewer first asks the question. Hence, it's a good idea to ask the question on what parameter should we decide whether the client should enter the market or not. This helps in identifying the goal that the client is trying to achieve and also the metric based on which the client would evaluate their success. In this case specifically, the candidate has uncovered that the client is looking to maximize profits and would like to get an estimation of what kind of profits they could expect in the first couple of years. There can also be market entry questions with a very different set of goals, where profits might not be the priority, but capturing market share would be.
Just give me a second. Okay. So, can I ask you a few preliminary questions
Of
before
course.
delving into the? So, can you give me some idea about the product?
Sure. So this is a solar lantern which runs on 6 hours of solar power, and that charges it up completely. And based on this, it's able to provide illumination for around 8 hours, and it can be used at night time. And the illumination is sufficient for a small room.
Okay. So, how much is the product priced at?
So as of now, we're thinking of a price of around 6,000 rupees for the product.
Sure. So, where are we placed at the value chain? Are we only involved in the manufacturing, or do we have?
So we've not thought of that yet, and as part of the operating model, we'd like you to tell us how we should be placed in the value chain.
Okay. And are we located like exclusively in Germany, or do we have other centers of operation as well?
So we have centers of operation all around the world, but we're not present in India and have not yet catered to the Indian market.
Sure. Can I just have a minute to gather my thoughts?
Of course.
So I think I'll have a two-pronged approach for this case. First, I will estimate the profits by first gauging the size of the market and figuring out what the costs are, variable and fixed, and then figure out the profit from there. After which we'll delve into the manufacturing, like the hurdles that we face while manufacturing, marketing, and distribution of the product, and then figure out an operating model. Does that sound fine?
That sounds like a great idea. Let's do that. After asking good preliminary questions, the candidate has now outlined his overall approach to solve the case. While he has done a good job by stating his approach, he could have structured it better. So instead of just saying that profits would be computed by evaluating market size and then looking into the costs to arrive at a final number, he could have said that I would like to break down profits as market size multiplied by market share multiplied by the profit per unit subtracted by the total fixed investments that might go into this project. This is a more comprehensive mathematical formula for the profits to be evaluated. Similarly, for the operating model, he could have said, I would like to look across three parts of the value chain, namely manufacturing, distribution, and sales and marketing, and figure out the potential hurdles that the client might face, and then based on it take a call of which parts of the value chain should be done in-house versus which parts we might have to go in for an acquisition, joint venture, or outsourcing to third parties.
So first about the market size, right? I think since this is a product which caters to the customers directly, we'll have to identify customers and divide them based on an income bracket, which would then identify which will then help us identify how much of each of the brackets will opt for our product, right?
All right, so why don't you think through how we should estimate the market size, and then we could go ahead with that.
Sure.
The case has now moved to an estimation problem to evaluate the market size for solar lanterns. Over here, the candidate should have thought through his approach to compute the total market size before discussing with the interviewer. Since he has not done this, he struggles with it later during the interview. Dear viewer, if you're seeing this case for the first time, it would be a good idea for you to try and estimate the total size yourself before you see the rest of the case.
So I think there are three classifications in which we can divide them based on their incomes. One is the or say poor income families.
Okay.
Poor or low income families, and then is the lower middle class families.
Okay, so lower income are the poorest section, and then lower middle class. All right.
Lower middle class. And then we'll have the upper middle class and the upper middle class.
So let's just call them poor, lower middle class, and middle class.
Sure. And middle class. Right. So ideally the income of a poor income person would be less than 3 lakhs an annum.
Of a poor income household, all right.
Yeah, 3 lakhs an annum. So
maybe that's an overestimation. I think let's keep the lowest segment at around less than even 1 lakh per annum.
Okay.
So we can actually give you the splits for it. So poor is less than 1 lakh per annum. Middle is between 2 to 4 lakhs.
Okay.
And let's say, lower middle is 2 to 4 lakhs, and middle class is 4 lakhs and above.
So, what is the? Can I ask you another preliminary question? So, yeah, what is the estimation on the power that a household would save by using this product?
They wouldn't really be saving any power because they're essentially, it's a solar powered lantern, so it doesn't really run on electricity. Do you mean in terms of?
In terms of opting for this product as opposed to say a product which is run on electricity?
So I think this wouldn't be a substitute for something like a tube light, but it will be more useful in places where there is no electricity, or there's insufficient electricity, or there are outages.
Sure.
Where the solar lantern can help.
Sure. Okay. So we can just give me one moment.
Sure.
So in a market like India, because there are a lot of subsidies which the government offers for solar products, and in order to make them more affordable for the poor community, we can say
you mean collaborate with the government?
Collaborate with the government in order to provide, like, in order to capture that.
We can explore that, but for the time being, we have to assume that it will be at an MRP of 6,000 rupees
6,000
for the
rupees.
customer.
So in that case, I think less than 5% of the poor income bracket would be able to afford our product. Even though it's going to be useful to them, even though they will be reaping the most amount of benefits from it.
Why 5% and why not, like, let's say 40%?
Uh,
Any justification for that? What makes you believe that they won't be able to afford it?
because it's because the amount of so it's almost equivalent to their monthly income.
Right.
The product is almost equivalent to their monthly income, and given that they'll have to given that the dispensable amount of money that they'll have after utilities and other daily and monthly expenses, they'll have little to spare.
Right.
It's
When doing an estimation exercise, at some point you'll have to make assumptions on numbers. But always try and give reasonable justifications as to why you're choosing a particular number. Here, the candidate made one such assumption regarding the percentage of the poor population which would be able to afford the solar lantern. However, he did not give any justification for the same. But when prodded by the interviewer, he was able to come up with a reasonable one. Ideally, the candidate should have given it without the need for the interviewer's prodding.
fair to
I think
assume
that's fair to assume. In fact, based on what you're saying, we could come to a conclusion that the poor won't be able to afford it. But let's say if we had to make it affordable to them, this is a product that has a life of 2 years. Is there any mechanism you could suggest apart from the government subsidy aspect?
So another thing, so off the top of my head, what I can think of is asking them to pay a monthly premium of say 10% of their monthly income would 5 to 10% of their monthly income would make it more affordable for them.
So you mean dividing the cost of the lantern over a period of time?
Yeah, dividing it over a period of time.
We could actually explore it. So let's say that the lantern that costs around 6,000 rupees, the customer has an option of paying it over the life of the products over, let's say,
2 years.
2 years. So on a monthly basis, let's see what it comes out to be for a customer, the price.
Okay. It's around 25 rupees
Around 25 rupees
a month
is 250.
or 250 a month.
Right.
250 a month.
Yeah.
So like 250 in 250 on 7,000 around 7,000 rupees of monthly income is something that they can afford. Given that they would be equally investing it in other forms of other forms of energy, like buying kerosene for their lanterns. So I think 250 rupees would be a affordable amount of money, and then we'd be able to capture this particular segment of the market.
So what is the monthly income of the poor segment? Let's say an average income of 60 grand per year. So on a monthly basis, that comes out to be so that's 5,000 income that they have on a monthly basis. So on a do you think 300 rupees is something, or rather 250 rupees per month is something that they will be able to afford?
I think they because they'll anyways have to invest, this 5,000 would go would be invested in buying utilities for their family. For example, buying kerosene for the lamps that they'd otherwise use, right? So 250 rupees would approximately be equal to the amount of money that they are otherwise be spending on kerosene.
All right.
So
sure.
it will make it affordable for them.
Fine. So let's say 20% of the poor population would be able to go ahead with our lantern.
And do we have a number on how many families are in this bracket.
Why don't you give us an estimate of that?
So in a country like India, I'd expect around 60% of the population, like 60% of the population, to be in this bracket, and 60% of 2 billion.
Maybe 60% is a
Higher.
overestimation. Let's say 30%.
Okay, so 30% of 2 billion,
Hmm.
and 4 people in a family, right?
Let's say 5 in rural India. Families tend to be larger.
And yeah, 5 people in a family, so that makes it around 1.2 million families.
All right, fine.
1.2 million families.
1.2 million. So we've got 1.3 billion is the total population. 1.2 billion is the total population of India. Multiplied by 30.
2 billion, right?
1.2 billion.
1.2 billion is the population.
Yes, yes.
Okay,
So why don't you just recalculate?
sure.
For estimation problems, it's a good idea to remember certain key numbers, such as the population of your country, the population of the city you live in, the area in square kilometers of your city, even the population split across income segments, population split by urban rural geographies. Once you've done several guesstimates, you would get a good hang of which are these key numbers that you should try and remember. For a list of some of these numbers, you can also refer to the Case Interviews Cracked book.
$36 million. Wait, 36 divided by 5. 7.2 million.
Are you sure about that? We've got 1,300 million as the total number of citizens. During the heat of an interview, when it's a high pressure situation, it's very easy to go wrong with calculations. However, calculations are a basic qualification consideration during case interviews, and you have to ensure that you get them right. So it's advisable to take your time when you're making a calculation. Write all your calculation steps neatly so that you're able to systematically solve it and then discuss it with the interviewer. So we have 1,200 million families. This you need to divide by 5, so that gives you 240 million households, and that gets multiplied by 30%.
30%.
So that's around 80 million. Right?
Sure.
So this is fine. Let's say we do the same analysis across income segments, and across the 3 income segments, let's say a total of 10% of the population, around 20% of the population is going to use our solar lanterns. From an affordability standpoint, what other factors do you think will depend? So let's say of the total households that we have, 240 million households, we've got 20% of the households which are interested in our product. So let's say around 50 million households can afford the product. What other considerations would you have on the market size?
So one of the biggest problems would be that this is a product that people would not buy more than once. So the initial fixed cost that fixed cost of the whole plant.
That's a separate issue. That's a issue for us. In terms of, do you think everyone who can afford the solar lantern will buy our product? Is affordability the only criteria?
No. So I think that there is an apprehension towards new technologies in general, and people tend to oppose the usage of new technologies. That being
I guess in this situation that wouldn't be really the concern because it's a simple
Simple
solar
solar.
lantern. There's nothing to really worry about, unlike GM crops.
Yeah.
But let's say
Yeah, and another thing is obviously like the solar, the sunshine in a, like sunshine at a particular place.
you think that's not a problem in most cases of India. What else do you think could be a criteria? What about need for the product? Does everyone need this product?
Well, so emergency, like given the erratic nature of power supply in India,
Right.
we like I do believe that there is a need for such like
I understand what you're saying, but what about urban consumers? Urban versus rural, who do you think would need
I think rural consumers would prefer our product much more than the urban users.
Is there any need scenario in urban
So,
consumers?
like, off the top of my head, what we can do is like refurbish the product in a way that it serves as a reading lamp for users in the urban area.
But there are several alternatives that they have, right, which are
Yeah.
reasonably good and at a reasonable
True.
price. So I guess we can exclude urban consumers because
Mhm.
electricity outage is not really an issue, and
True.
focus on rural consumers. And within rural consumers, do you think uh, there would be some people who need it more, some people who would need it less?
Oh yeah. So even in rural areas, even in rural areas. So I think the split can be done in a way that there are like so in a way that rural areas can further be classified into sort of like very rural areas and somewhat developed rural areas.
Okay.
In the sense
and what
that
would be the how would you decide which ones come under let's say semi-rural areas and rural areas? What would be the distinguishing factor for them?
so A is the amount of like so the proliferation of electricity and the proliferation of other nationalized commodities, right? So that proves how.
I think electricity is a very important point that you mentioned. So why not let's divide the rural population by the availability of electricity. So let's have two classes of rural population. Ones that are on the grid, which are connected to the electricity supply,
Yeah.
and another segment which is off the grid, which is not connected to electricity supply. And let's put numbers out there in terms of what is the difference in percentage.
Sure. So out of the total number of families, we can come to an estimate or like estimate that the number of rural people living in rural areas is around
Let's go with 70%.
70%. So this is 70% of the total number of families.
Why don't we just do the math for that? So 70% of 80
70%
million.
of 240, right?
Right, of 240. Yes, of 240.
$168.
Let's just round that to 150 million.
Sure. Yep. Like so in a country like India, around 80% of all the places are electrified.
Fair
so
enough.
we can assume that out of the rural population, around 20 to 30% is off the grid.
Okay.
So we what do you think is the
Yeah,
right estimate?
that's a fine assumption. 20% off the grid, 80% on the grid.
20%. 80%.
Here, the candidate makes an assumption of what is the split between how much of India is on the grid versus how much is off the grid, and he quickly checks the assumption with the interviewer. This is an example of a situation where it's okay to ask the interviewer for help and get his inputs and then go ahead with the case.
Yeah, and so yeah, pricing it at our own original model of 250 rupees per month, we'll be able to we'll be able to capture the the 30 million families living off the grid.
Okay.
And on the grid, we definitely need some amount of incentives that we have to offer them for them to convert, because in rural areas the electricity the amount that they pay for electricity is in fact not much. They are given at a very subsidized price. So the initial consideration that we had, that they will be willing to spend 250 rupees because they are
So
otherwise have to spend.
we've already considered affordability, right? And we've said that of the total households, 20% would be able to afford the solar lantern.
Yeah.
So let's keep that aside.
Okay.
So of the total families, we've already considered affordability. Now we are looking at need.
Yeah.
And in need, what would you suggest? So we've said that rural families would need it more, and within on-grid and off-grid, what would you suggest?
So people like of the families living off the grid, I think we'd be able to capture the whole market.
Right. Okay.
And on the grid, so on the grid, people will already be using the need that would exist for a solar lantern would be much less than the people living off the grid. And
All right. So fair enough.
given that
Based on this, why don't you give us a final number in terms of what is the total number of lanterns we can expect to sell?
So we can assume that we'd be able to sell it to each family, like we'd be able to sell at least one or two.
Yeah, let's assume we can sell one to all off-grid families and we can't sell any to on-grid families.
So that makes it 30 million.
Can you just recheck all your steps and see if you've made all considerations from the beginning? I think we are missing affordability, right? So 240 million are the total households in India, of which 70% are rural, which is 150 million, of which off-grid are 30 million, and of which we said that around 20% can afford. Let's go with 50% can afford, because these are off-grid families. They tend to be
It's 15
needing
million.
it a lot more. Fair enough. All right. So we've got 15 million who can purchase our product.
Yes.
So I guess that's the market size. What would you like to do next?
So, since we don't have any competitors, we can assume that we'll be having the complete market share for this 15 million, 15 million of the products that we're gonna sell. Can you tell me the variable cost that's associated per unit of the lantern that we are producing?
Sure. So we have some estimations, and based on that, our total variable cost is 90% of our selling price.
Okay, it's 90%. And the selling price is
6,000 rupees, yes.
Okay, and what are the fixed costs?
Our fixed costs, we have an estimation of that, but for the timing, let's exclude that and compute our profits.
So profits is equal to like the market share multiplied by the cost minus the fixed cost, variable cost, right? So it's yeah, it's gonna be $90 billion.
All right, fair enough. So this looks good, Avinash. Let's synthesize the case as of now and tell us what you found out so far.
So I found out that the market is not completely open for for our product. We can look forward to selling our products in the lower income families where they tend to use the product more, and also the pricing options have to be altered according to the income range of the customer. And for lower income families, it's much better to price them over a period of 2 years, as opposed to, say, asking them to pay up like a large sum of amount at upfront in the beginning. And and also, and then I found out that there are two major segments of rural population who would be interested in buying our product. One would be the people who are living off the grid, or the ones that live in areas which are not electrified, and the other ones are the ones who live in areas which are electrified but do not receive continuous supply of energy.
All right.
So
All right, that's great. Thanks a lot, Avinash. We'll let
Thank
you
you.
know what happens. Thank you. In conclusion, let's look at the learnings from this case. In terms of positives, the candidate asked good preliminary questions regarding the goal of the market entry, which part of the value chain is the client looking to enter, etc. He also explained his overall approach to solve the market entry by dividing it into two parts to estimate profits and then to decide what should be the operating model. Let's now look at the areas of improvement for the candidate. The estimation involved in the market sizing could have had a much better approach if the candidate would have thought out his entire structure before proceeding ahead and then doing the calculations. The candidate also made several calculation mistakes which have to be avoided during a case interview. The candidate also lost considerable amount of time while doing the estimation, which meant he could not complete the case. If the candidate had a better structure to solve the estimation problem, which was aligned with the interviewer beforehand, then he could have quickly gone through the calculations and arrived at a final answer.